Hi friends, welcome to yet another episode of A This and That. My name is A This, that's one of my names. I'm so excited for yet another month, yet another theme, yet another episode. Thank you so much for following along as much as you have so far. Thank you for listening, thank you for watching, thank you for liking, sharing, subscribing, commenting, and especially for engaging with me. Thank you so very much. Today, I am so excited because we have a new topic, and this month's theme is going to be main characters. So think back to your childhood, and if you grew up watching cartoons, movies, and the like, I want you to think back to what your favorite cartoon or movie was as a child. For me, I watched a lot of cartoons, whether it was Courage the Cowardly Dog. I think that was one of my favorites. Brave Face, My Life is Complicated, Boyfriends, that was another of my favorites. 16, Trying to Find My Way, Got a New Job, I'm gonna start with them all today. That was one of my favorites. I also watched a lot of soap operas growing up. So I watched, Storm Over Paradise was the thing all the time. Like, everybody and their mother was watching Storm Over Paradise. I'm not even kidding. And then if you grew up reading books instead, because not everyone grew up watching TV, that's fine. I grew up reading a lot of books as well, especially African literature. From a young age, I read a lot of African literature. Thank you to my mom. Thank you, Mom. So that's where I developed my love for reading and literature. The first African literature story that I read that had me on a chokehold, and this is probably my favorite story of all time, even now as an adult. It's called Tekayo. It's a short story actually, and it's part of an anthology of short stories by Grace Ogot, who's one of the most prolific Kenyan authors of all time. And this story is so twisted and terrible actually. It traumatized me as a kid because essentially this man, Tekayo, he is a grandfather basically, and where he lived with all his wives. I think he had 2 wives, his sons and their children. So it was like a whole multi-generational family. Once when he was on a hunting spree, he came across a large piece of meat, and he was like, oh, maybe somebody left an animal, and he roasted it and he ate it. I think it was a liver actually. It was a liver. And this was the best thing he had ever tasted in his entire life. And since then, he had an obsession to find out what did he eat, because he didn't know. He was like, it's not a cow. And he was like, let me just prove it. He slaughtered a cow and ate the liver, and it was like, that's not it. It wasn't a chicken, of course. It wasn't a goat. He even started hunting deers and elephants and wild animals, basically a lion, to try and figure out what is that meat, and he couldn't figure it out, and he started to have a lot of agony and he was wasting away. So for some reason he started having dreams about his youngest grandchild, and she kept calling to him, grandpa, grandpa, and then the child would disappear, and that was the whole dream. So he started having this recurring dream. And he was like, he doesn't understand what the dream means, but it happened so much that this guy decided to kill his grandchild and take out her liver and eat it. And that was it. That was the meat he had been looking for. And the kids start disappearing, and everyone is like, oh, wow, what's going on? What's killing our kids? And they start to feel like it's either a bad spirit that has possess the community, or it's a strange animal that is, on a hunting spree, killing the kids and everything, or it's an enemy of something. Turns out it was old man Tekayo. It was Tekayo all along. And imagine I read this as a child, I was maybe 8. This was traumatizing. And I was looking at my grandpa hey, you won't catch me sleeping. These are the stories we were learning as kids. And we're wondering why we're not okay. Honestly. The whole point of going back to our childhoods and thinking thinking back to our favorite stories, is I want us to remember who were our favorite characters growing up when we were kids, right? And I think when people are writing stories or when people are writing movie scripts, there's a very clear intention, because I've found quite often that the main character usually evokes a lot of emotion out of me. So I find myself oftentimes wanting to identify with the main character or the protagonist, right? It's a very psychological allegiance or loyalty to the protagonist, basically. And when the protagonist is going through a hard time, we really feel their pain. Like, I am the kind of person who cries when I watch movies, and especially when the person is going through such a hard time. All those Nollywood movies I used to watch, and the script is the same. The poor girl from the village is being mistreated and beaten. I would cry until my head is aching, until I'm coughing and like heaving. Oh Lord. I often identify so strongly with the main character. I want them to win. When somebody is plotting against them, I'm so angry. I'm like, oh no, what are you doing? I'm so angry. I'm so irritated. Like, I'm rooting for the main character. When the main character is finally happy, even if their happiness makes other people sad, I'm happy. So I make exceptions for the main character. I really strongly identify with the main character. And the reverse is true. And I think this is true for most people. When it comes to the villain or the villainous characters or the antagonist in the story, we strongly are against the antagonist. We're not rooting for them. If anything, we're waiting on their downfall. We are so against them. We hate them. We hate their guts. And when the villain fails or dies in the end, we're like, finally, they're dead. Finally, that sounds so weird when I say it out loud. Finally, they're dead. Finally, they're not gonna mess with our main character anymore. Victory is achieved. Peace is restored. The resolution is done. And I think a lot of people who make movies, who write books, know this. The characteristics they choose to associate with the villains and with the main characters are very intentional and very particular. I know we've all had this quote that says, you can't separate the art from the artist. So, me personally, I hate to say it, but I truly feel that you can't separate the art from the artist. Even though I wish I could, because sometimes it's like, yeah, the artist sucks as a person, but like, let's get into this Bob, or this movie is awesome or something. Art is almost like a window into the soul of the artist. Art is the way that somebody expresses what's on their mind, what's in their head, like their thoughts, their feelings, like what they're going through. Art is a depiction of the mentality or the inner workings of an artist. Now, thinking back to the movies, the books, the stories, the cartoons we watched as kids, and thinking back to this binary idea of villain versus main character, or protagonist versus antagonist, if you notice, oftentimes the protagonist, because this is somebody we should want to identify with, or we have been told that that's the person we should aspire to be. That's the main. Who doesn't want to be the main character? Who wants to be number 2, number 3, number 5? We all want to be number 1, right? And that's a natural feeling, because we've been taught since we are young that we should aspire to be the best, the main character, the top. So think about all the villains in the cartoons we watched growing up as kids. Usually they had like a lot of darkness around them to match the theme. They had like a long pointed nose, really long nails and long fingers. They had like unkempt hair that was just everywhere. They had sometimes they had really big lips that were like portraying how greedy they were. They had, typically a lot of the time, they were darker in features and skin and everything. Maybe they were big and, plus size and greedy. Think about all these images being registered by a child's mind and what the effect is. Essentially, we start to think about these bad people have these bad characteristics and they have all these bad features that I don't want. I don't want to be ugly. I don't want to have unkempt hair and unkempt nails and a nose that looks how and lips that look how and all of that stuff. And the good people, they have fair skin and long, nice hair and they're suffering. It's unfair. Like, think about those images being captured by a young mind. From a young age, kids start to be fed information and they start to be conditioned to see things a certain way. They're told, if you work hard, it's good. If you don't work hard, it's lazy. Gluttony is a sin. You're going to get fat and whatever. Like, society, through education, through movies, through all these things, starts to feed these pieces of information to kids from a very young age, and they start to be molded and shaped to think in a certain way, to believe certain things, to look at the world in a certain way, right? When kids start to internalize information about certain things, simple things, that person is bad, this person is good. The bad person has these type of features and the good person has these type of features. And I've seen 10 movies where the bad people tend to have this type of features and the good people tend to have this type of features. What does that mean? Does that mean bad people look like this and good people look like this? I don't know. Kids are very impressionable, right? And they start to internalize this information. They start to believe it as true, and it shapes how they move through life, the things they believe when they move through life about other people and about themselves. It's insidious, it's very subtle, but it's there. And it's often associated with a lot of racism, a lot of anti-Semitism, a lot of anti-blackness, a lot of ableism, a lot of xenophobia even, right? It's often associated with all these structures of discrimination, and they are only reinforced by the politics of beauty and desirability. And one of the books, this is actually the first book that I read this year, and this book actually inspired me to think about this topic. And even though the book focuses more on the beauty side, I think it's still a helpful framework to think about the ideas we perceive about people and how we've been indoctrinated to think about certain people, especially since we are young. So this is the book. It's called Belly of the Beast: The Politics of Anti-Fatness as Anti-Blackness. It's by Dashawn L. Harrison, and this is such a good book. This book talks about the origins of anti-fatness as rooted in slavery and anti-blackness. It talks about how our moral judgment of people is often linked to how they look, how they present, and it's so easy to construct narratives about people and justify bad things happening to them. And so when I was reading this book, I started to think about propaganda. And I'm talking about propaganda here from the standpoint of indoctrination, how we are taught to form ideas and opinions about certain people from a young age. But before anything, let's talk about what is propaganda. So according to the dictionary, propaganda is information, especially of a biased or misleading nature, used to promote or publicize a particular political cause or point of view. And when I was thinking about it, I came upon a man called Edward Bernays, and he was an American theorist and is considered a pioneer in the field of propaganda and PR. So he is colloquially known as the father of PR. And he said the masses, like people in general, can only process a small amount of information at a time. So essentially, they're not smart enough. And therefore, we need people who are select, people who are intelligent, who can do the thinking for people, right? And he says that propaganda is actually necessary. He terms it as necessary for the functioning of a democratic society. When it comes to propaganda, and especially when the so-called pioneer or father of modern propaganda as we understand it, when he says things like we need to create the will of the people, it's very concerning to me, and it makes me wonder how reliable is the information I have about people, right? It really, really begs the question for me, at least. The artists, the authors, the writers, the creators of all these books and movies, cartoons and everything, how a lot of them often resort to racist, anti-fat stereotypes to try and portray a message about what they believe about, whether it's racially marginalized people, whether it's fat or plus size people, whether it's Jewish people, Arab people, disabled people, women, African people, queer people. So they have often a very intentional way of depicting people that evokes a certain emotion in us. And often these people who are marginalized and are minoritized in society are depicted as the villainous characters. So you'll find that the villain often maybe has hair that looks like the hair that a lot of black people have. Maybe the darker character will be lazy to, go along with the idea of black people as lazy, or you'll find the plus size character as gluttonous and maybe even lazy, or disabled people as, especially maybe somebody who's physically disabled and with a facial difference, the one who's carrying kids, to sort of present this idea that they're scary, they're something you should look away from, there's something you should run away from. It's often so insidious, and it's baked into our psyche, it's baked into our minds, and we often don't realize that we hold these opinions or we have these perspectives. And the thing of the matter is, I truly believe that all of us in society, because of how our society is structured, whether we want to accept it or not, we all have problematic views. So if you're thinking like, oh, I'm not racist, I'm not misogynistic, I'm not ableist, I'm not fatphobic, chances are you have been conditioned to be, and that is why each of us needs to do the work to unlearn them, to untangle them. The problem is when kids are really young and they're being fed a lot of information that is like, Africans are like this and that, Arabs are like this and that. They grow up believing that these other people are villains. They're not as developed, they're not as civilized. And then they start to have a superiority complex towards those types of people. And what ends up happening is we grow up in a society where some of us feel that we are inherently better than other people because of the messaging we received when we were growing up, because of the stories we read, because of the books we read, because of the movies we watched, that were presented in a certain way based on the author's or the artist's perspective, based on the artist's biases, whether they are racist biases or fatphobic biases or ableist biases or misogynistic biases, whether it's that certain people are inherently like terrorists or have an inherent affinity towards terrorism because they're violent, they're dangerous, their culture is barbaric. And so even when these people are trying to just fight for a good life, fight for good conditions to live in, it's like, oh, look at them, how barbaric. Look at them. Like, we don't see other people as people like us. We don't realize that most people in the world have dreams have likes and dislikes, have a favorite food, a favorite TV show, have a favorite joke they like to laugh at, have certain quirks about them. We don't realize that everybody is just a person, and everybody deserves the full life, the full dignity that is afforded to every human being, or that should be afforded to every human being. We start to form very dark and twisted opinions and perspectives about other people. And sometimes we have those biases against our very own selves, right? What do you think? What do you think, especially now when there's so much information dissemination, there's so much social media, some might even say there's so much propaganda going around. There's also so many efforts to counter that propaganda, because it's still embedded in the systems. It still has all those traces of anti-blackness and anti-fatness and misogyny and homophobia and ableism. It still has all those traces. What do you think about this? Do you think you are a main character? Do you think as a child, seeing certain images of either yourself or other people being portrayed in certain ways influenced how you view yourself, how you view other people, how you view the world? And what do you think we can do as a society to combat that? Please let me know what you think. For now, thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening, for those who listened instead. It's again been an honor to talk to you about these things. Please remember to like, share, subscribe, comment. Let me know what you think. I'll see you in the next episode, where I will be interviewing one of you about the same topic. Thank you guys. Bye.